Okay, thank you and welcome to today's labor market information training session. Today's session is titled LMI at the intersection of education training in the workforce. And honestly, in my opinion, LMI, labor market information, is most valuable and most useful at that intersection, like where those transition points are as students graduate from high school or post-secondary and trying to enter the workforce and make those decisions. So we're going to inspect that area with labor market information at the crux of it. And I'm glad to have you here today with me. If you have any questions while we go, I encourage you to throw them into the chat or raise your hand and we can address them at points throughout. I plan on taking a short break in the middle, just so you know. And the plan, we're starting now, so we can go, is to do a little labor market update and then move into the tools. So what is DEED? For those of you that aren't familiar, we are the State Department of Employment and Economic Development in Minnesota. And at its most basic level, we are the organization responsible for workforce development and economic development activities throughout the state. But within DEED, and more specific to this presentation, is the Labor Market Information Office, which is where I work. And my name is Carson.gorecki. I didn't introduce myself yet. I am the regional labor market analyst for Northeast Minnesota, and there are 6 of us regional analysts throughout the state. And we are located in those local regions and meant to be points of contact and experts for those local economies and local workforces. So the Labor Market Information Office does a bunch. In addition to that, you may know us best for our jobs data that are released every month, as well as our unemployment rates. But we do so much more than that. Employment statistics, unemployment rates, top of the list, but we also do a lot of detailed wages and salary data, job projections. So how is the workforce expected to change over the next 2 or 10 years, educational requirements for occupations, and career pathways. A lot of these things will be really of interest, I think, this morning, and I can't wait to dive in some more. But at the crux of all of this, labor market information, its primary purpose is to help organizations and individuals make sound, fact-based, data-based decisions. A little bit more on our plan for today. I gave you an introduction to DEED. We're going to talk a little bit about those core labor market information concepts, so we're all on the same page. And then we're going to do a brief labor market update, and that serves 2 purposes. It's going to give everybody kind of the latest labor market data, so where we're at right now in the state, but I'm also going to show you some of the tools and the data sources that we're going to talk about in more detail later. So some examples are going to be given there. The tools that we're going to focus on today, again, are at that intersection of education and the educational system in Minnesota and the workforce. So the interplay and the connection between those two, all of the tools we'll be looking at will have some role in that space. So we'll look at occupational employment and wage statistics, or OEWS, job vacancy survey, employment outlook, which is our projections, occupations in demand / career pathways, which is an exciting tool I'm excited to share some more with you on, graduate employment outcomes, or GEO, and some associated tools from that. And then the statewide longitudinal education data system, or SLEDS. So those are the core ones I'm going to touch on, and then, time permitting, we're also going to touch on some other important data sources that I really find useful, but I typically try to cram in too much, so we'll see where we're at after that hour and a half, and we'll stick around to answer questions too. So if we don't get to your question during the session and you have a little time to stick around after, I'll be happy to do that. All right, so what is done with our DEED labor market tools? We have over 24 tools at this point on our website. There's different ways that we collect those data, either by surveys and sampling or census and administrative data. But what do we do with it? A whole bunch of things. We write publications and do research. Employment Trends is our quarterly publication. Employment Review is our monthly publication. We write little blogs on subjects of of immediate interest. I just wrote a local look blog, is what we call them, for Northeast Minnesota on our regional 10-year employment projections. That's posted on our website. We also publish reports and profiles on industries, counties, regions. We do presentations to all sorts of groups. I'm going to be presenting to some high school career exploration classes in the next couple weeks. We collaborate with our stakeholders, be that other government agencies, workforce development groups, economic development groups, chambers of commerce. We respond to data requests. So if you have a question related to any of these sources that we're going to talk about today that isn't addressed or you can't find it, you reach out to your regional analyst and we can answer those questions for you. And then we create new tools. So we try to create new value, combining data sources to try and get at those answers in an understandable and accessible way. Some of the concepts that are important are the different areas that we look at. So all of the data that we look at, or for the most part, are going to be specific to the state of Minnesota, the jurisdictions therein. Metropolitan statistical areas is one of the geographies that we use commonly. Planning regions, that's the 6 regions that I was talking about that are represented by us regional analysts, and that's in the upper right there. Economic development regions are commonly used as well. Workforce development or investment areas or service areas. I feel like there's 5 different names for workforce development boards representing. And then counties tend to be the most common geographies that these data are available for, but just know that each tool is available at different levels. Sources of data, all different kinds. Some comes from the federal government, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the United States Census Bureau, Bureau of Employment Analysis or Economic Analysis. But then we also get data that we share with other departments at the state level, such as the Department of Education, MDE, or Department of Revenue. And then we also work with our workforce development system, so MinnesotaWorks.net, Career One Stop, or other sources that we use commonly. All right, another core concept, who is in the labor force? So when I talk about the labor force, I'm talking about a specific group of folks. And these folks are people that are either currently working, so employed currently, or are not working but are actively looking for work, and actively looking for work within the last month or 4 weeks. So if you're in that group, those kind of 2 sections, you're deemed to be in the labor force. If you haven't looked for work in the last month, even if you're interested in finding work, you are deemed to be out of the labor force. So when I talk about that in the next couple slides, you know who I'm referring to. Just to answer Mary's question real quickly, whether we collaborate with the Office of Higher Education as well, we do. And you'll see some of that evidence in the data we talk about later. So thank you for that question. Unemployment has specific definitions. When we talk about the unemployment rate that we publish each month, that is kind of in the middle of a spectrum of how we define unemployment. That is the folks that have looked for work actively in the last month. So if it's longer than that, you're still, if you haven't looked in the last 4 weeks, you're not deemed to be in that unemployment rate. So discouraged folks or marginally attached is what we call them. Those folks are deemed to be out of the labor force in that kind of orange-red section. But anybody in that green section is counted in that unemployment rate that we publish typically. But just know that there are a lot of different ways actually to measure unemployment, going from narrow, which is just like long-term unemployment, to broad, which is people that working part-time. So they're employed, but they would want to be working more than they are. So we refer to that more as underemployment. Okay, so we got some core concepts. Now we're going to jump into a brief labor market update. Hold on tight. You can't see the charts super well, but if you have a chance to go back and look at the recording of the pie chart memes, they're pretty good. So what is going on in the labor force? Now that we all have a great understanding of what the labor force is, we can see how it has been changing over the last couple decades. So that top blue line there represents the share of people 16 plus that are either working or looking for work in that year. So we topped out at 75% of that 16 plus non-institutional population in 2000. And we've seen generally decline since then. And that represents that increase from the 70s to 2000 represents largely women entering the workforce in larger shares. Since then, the decrease can largely be attributed to the aging of the population and workforce. But at the same time, our population has been growing fast enough where that the labor force itself has increased, even though labor force participation has declined. And you can see the decline that was created by the pandemic there at the end. So we've had the lowest labor force participation in 2023 that we've had since the late 70s. Unemployment rate varies by state. Up in my region in Northeast Minnesota, we tend to have higher unemployment. We have a lot more seasonal type of jobs and industries. So that kind of lends itself to more unemployment or higher unemployment. But you could see that 3.2 is kind of the highest you'll see in the workforce service areas on the left. And other than that, we're down around 2.5 below 3, which is often the agreed upon measure of full employment, because you're always going to have a little bit of unemployment as kind of like lubrication, we say, for the workforce. Because if you have nobody looking for work, that would be really bad for employers because they don't have anybody to hire. Of course, when unemployment is low, it means that job seekers have some of that power. So diving in a little bit into the smaller timeline, in Minnesota, you can see the top line is the number of people in the labor force. The orange line there, the second line, is the number of people employed. And then the gray bar is the difference between those two, the unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate before the pandemic was about 3.4, 3.5% on average. And while we're starting to get back up to that in the last couple months, we are still on average below that historical rate. So fewer people looking for work means that there's fewer people in the labor force as well, but fewer people that are having trouble finding work too. Number of jobs took a big hit during the pandemic, no surprise, but we did recover fully. I think it took 38 months to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. So in February of 2020, 38 months later, we finally reached that number again. And now we're starting to climb above that. And you can see that we're kind of jumping back on that growth trajectory that we were pre-pandemic. When I talk about the tight labor market, there's a specific measure that we like to use for that. And that is the relationship between the number of job seekers, so the people that are looking for work actively, so in this sense, the unemployed folks, and the number of job vacancies. So we track both of those things so we can compare them. And the black dot in this chart represents the ratio of job seekers per job vacancy. So, for example, in the Great Recession, 2009, 2010, we had 8.2 job seekers or unemployed persons per every single job opening, job vacancy. So that meant that we had a loose labor market. We had a lot of people looking for work, not a lot of jobs. 10 years later, we are in the exact opposite situation. We have fewer than a single job seeker per job vacancy. So below 1, that ratio is evidence that we have a tight labor market, and the pandemic, after a brief blip up, has exacerbated that. We're starting to see a little bit of loosening of the labor market, but for the most part, we're still tighter than we were pre-pandemic. All right, one more concept that's useful to have as we move forward. Industry versus occupation. Sometimes they get used interchangeably, but when I use them, I have very specific definitions for them. So when I talk about industries, I'm talking about what the employer or business is doing. So an example would be a manufacturer, a healthcare provider, organization, healthcare provider, or like a hotel would be an accommodation and food services, a construction company. Occupation is what the individual worker is doing or the group of workers. So you can have accountants, registered nurses, construction laborers. They can all work in specific industries. But for example, if you have an accountant can work, that's an occupation, can work across basically every industry. So industry is not always the same as occupation. Just an important thing to remember. Here are some examples. So within the healthcare and social assistance industry, here are some of the top most common occupations listed. So some of them, maybe no surprise, a lot of like healthcare providers, registered nurses, home health and personal care aides, nursing assistants. But then you have medical secretaries, food servers, and social human service assistants and office clerks. So not necessarily directly providing healthcare, supporting healthcare provision, but also in the healthcare industry. Manufacturing, you can see some of the same things. You have folks that are actually working to produce goods, but then you have a lot of supporting occupations, industrial engineers, sales reps, accountants, etc. So this is a list of industries in Minnesota and some characteristics. So the number of jobs, healthcare and social assistance is our largest industry sector in Minnesota with over 510,000 jobs as of 2023. Followed by manufacturing, retail trade, educational services. So you can say we've got a decent mix of services and goods providing, or goods producing sectors. The other thing to point out is that this is from quarterly census of employment and wages, another tool that we produce data for. So this has employment and wages by detailed industry sector that it's available down to like very small cities. We won't be talking about today, but it's a very, very handy tool and probably our best data by industry. Most of the sources we're going to talk about today are for occupations. How have those sectors changed recently? So since 2019 to Q2 2024, we've seen some growth in healthcare and social assistance, our largest sector, construction, public administration, professional and scientific tech services. So again, a good mix there. The fastest growing have been in construction and utilities. Losses in admin and support and waste management services, which is kind of a bit of a catch-all sector. Finance and insurance has seen some losses. Retail trade has been a bit up and down, but down more recently. And then accommodation, food services still hasn't quite recovered from the big impacts of the pandemic. The fastest declining is admin support and information. Information has been declining long term. That's like telecommunications, media, stuff like that. Okay, you survived the labor market update. I'll pause here if there are any questions and give you a second to put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand too, that works. All right. I will continue to push forward. We're going to look at the tools, the meat of the training session today. Feel free to follow along if you want. I will be moving pretty quickly, so don't feel frustrated if you can't keep up. I work in these all day, and this will, again, be recorded, so you can come back and check it out. Trying to squeeze in several tools here in the time we have. But to get to our data tools, there's a couple different ways you can get there. You can just web search MND data tools. That's a real straightforward way, maybe easiest to remember. Or if you have the DEED homepage and you know how to get there, the data tab dropdown will be there, and then data tools. So 2 clicks from the DEED homepage, not too bad. I have these links in this presentation I'll be sharing afterward, so you can just save and bookmark them that way as well. And then you can also search for those if you know a specific tool that you want to get to, like Laos, local area unemployment statistics, quarterly census of employment and wages, QCW, you can just do that, plus MND, that usually gets you where you need to go as well. Some tips and tricks for navigating our site. Keep an eye out on the left for a navigation bar. I'll show you this in a second, but that's where we'll have the list of different tools available. So if you ever go somewhere you don't want to get to or you don't want to be, you can always go back easily, either by hitting the back button or by clicking on the tool that you want to go to instead. When you're on the correct tool that you want to be at, the landing page, there's usually a landing page before you get into the tool itself. On that landing page, you'll have different resources, tutorials. It'll explain what those data are representing, the methodology, that sort of stuff. And then you'll usually see a use the data tool button or tab. It'll look like that gray little button in the right or on the bottom for QCW. There's in the header a little data tool link. That's how you get to the actual data tool. Often what we'll do is we'll put a visualization or something to simplify and show one way to look at the data. on the landing page, but that's not the tool in the data itself for the most part. When in a tool, if you want to return to data tool homepage, see a data home and data tool, the tool name home on the top usually, and that'll get you back to a previous spot if you've gone too far. Yep, I'll share out the slides. Thanks for that question. So yep, if you're on here and your email address was in the registration, you will get all of these materials afterward. So thanks for joining. Okay, so the tools we're going to dive into today, I break them out into two groups. So we have on one side the demand for workers. So a good example of that is like job vacancy survey. How many openings are there for a specific occupation and industry? Occupations in demand, it's in the title, right? Educational requirements for occupations, career pathways, and occupational employment and wage statistics. So, wages, number of jobs reflect demand to an extent as well. So we're going to look at those first. And then the other side is what I'm referring to as the supply of workers. So this will be more the education, training kind of side of things. Graduate employment outcomes gives you a great idea of resources. Statewide longitudinal education, it's not educational data system, it's education data system, SLEDs. Look more at the whole spectrum, it's longitudinal. So that means from K all the way through post-secondary. It tracks students in Minnesota, so that's super handy. I use it mostly to look at high school outcomes. And then if we have time, National Center for Education Data Systems, data education statistics, and the integrated post-secondary education data system, IPEDS. A lot of acronyms to keep track of, but if we have time, we'll talk about that as well. Okay, starting with OEWS, Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics. This is our core occupational data source. So it provides employment estimates and wage estimates for over 800 occupations each year, and we update it each year. And it goes, it has breakdowns by industry. So you have the detailed individual occupations, occupational groups, but it also gives you distribution by industry. It's available at the state level, 6 planning regions, the 13 EDRs, and then the 8 metropolitan statistical areas. So good geographic availability. And as I mentioned, it is the source of a lot of these occupational data tools that we're going to talk about after this. So it's all based on this OEWS structure or the standard occupational classification SOC code structure. That just is the classification, the way that we list occupations. They each have a code and a description. So if I say SOC, that's what I'm talking about. That is an example of the detailed occupational date page. I'm going to demonstrate this one. So we'll just show you a few examples and then I'll go into the website itself. So this is one occupation, child, family, and school social workers. And you can see you can select multiple areas. So you can see how employment is different between, say, Northeast Minnesota, the US. But then what is most of interest to folks using OEWS is the different wage across those areas. So we have detailed wages by percentile, 10th, 25th, median, 75th, 90th. We have mean wages as well. And if you download the data, you can get the annual wages. So it's available hourly, annually. But then you can see related occupations in the bottom right and how the wages change. So how maybe you got into this occupation, but it's not exactly what you were looking for. You can click into each of these other related occupations. And then leading industries, I mentioned that before. Most of them, child, family, and social social workers are in education and health services, not a surprise, but you also have a bunch in public administration. And the wage difference between those two is actually pretty significant. So that would be something that'd be interesting for folks to know. All right, So with that, let's go to the website. All right, so this is going right to the OEWS landing page. Let's zoom in a little bit. I talked about the ribbon across the top. So if you're at the Deed website, you just go data tools. That's how you get to all these different data tools. Here on the left is that navigation bar I was telling you about. So that's got our list of different data tools. We're in OEWS here. Here's that use the data tool pill I was telling you about, or button. You could also get there right there. If you want to know a little bit more about how we collect these data, how we produce them, we've got that here. Methodology, you can go to the national data here as well. And this, again, is just a visualization to summarize some of the data if you don't want to go into the data tool itself. But we are interested in the data tool proper. So in we will go. And here is your default landing page. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, at the top, you first start by selecting your area. And if you're not sure like what planning region or what economic development region or metropolitan statistical area you're in, hover over your county and it will tell you. And even better, so I'm up here in St. Louis County. I'm in EDR3, Northeast Minnesota Planning Region, and the Duluth, Minnesota, Wisconsin MSA. I click on it and it selected all of those areas for me. To submit that, I need to hit go. That's important because if you don't do that, you won't get the specific data to the area you're interested in. So remember, click and go. But once you do that, you'll see all the areas you're interested in down here in the table. And this table, that is OEWS. These are the employment and wage estimates. And this table is broken down by occupational group to start. So these are occupational groups here listed. And then the little triangle, if you click on it, will expand it to the detailed occupations within each occupational group. If you don't know where your occupation is, you're not familiar with the occupational structure, no worries. There's a search for occupation bar here. So let's say we are interested in registered nurse. Put that in, I get a drop down. I get some related occupations, registered nurses at the top, click search, and it filters out to that specific occupation. So that's one way to find it. And then if you'll notice, it's all wages to start by area. If you click this here, employment, it gives you the number of jobs, filled jobs for that occupation in each area. You'll notice that for Northeast and EDR3, exact same number. They're the same geographic area. They're just called two different things. It's actually kind of handy for me in Northeast Minnesota to have those be the same. Okay, so yep, there's a question. Think like here is the OEWS link to if you want to follow along and weren't able to get there. I should have shared that earlier, so sorry. And then yes, to answer your question. Yes, okay, good. We're on the same page. So you get your number of jobs here. This is where you can get some of that really nice detailed information I was telling you about before. Click on registered nurses. And in we go to the detailed occupational page. The title and the SOC code, that's what that number is there. Occupational description. So it gives you some detail on what this specific occupation is doing. And it excludes things if that's relevant. It gives you the employment estimate. This SE is your standard error, so that's just these are estimates. So 66,700 plus or minus 734. Just gives you an idea of the accuracy. And then the mean, 10th, 25th, median, 75th, and 90th percentile wages. The breakdown by sector. So you've got 58,120 registered nurses in education and health services. Super sector pays a median wage of $48.19 per hour. You make a little bit more if you're in public administration as a registered nurse, but there are many fewer there. And then all the other regional data are available here. And then in addition, you've got for the planning regions in the state, the projected 10-year change. So 2022 to 2032. So you can see how it's expected to change, because an occupation is not going to grow the same across the state. So we have estimates of how it's going to change differently across the state. And then related occupations down here. So hey, registered nurses isn't exactly what I was interested in, but maybe genetic counselors looks like something I want to explore. Or even if you're not sure, you just want to know what it is, you can click on that link there and go to genetic counselors and get this same page. And then more detailed tasks for registered nurses down here. So that is an example of OEWS detailed occupation page. And then if you want to go back, you just click this go back to search page. All right, and it brings us back, and we're still with registered nurses here. Let's say I want to start over. I just do this here, clear. If I want an area other than Minnesota and US. The other thing I'll point out is that if you just want all of the data and you want to mess with it yourself and manipulate it, just click this download button. It'll give you an Excel spreadsheet that you can open, and I'll show you what it looks like. And it will include whatever areas you have selected. Oh, that's not the one. This is the one. So you've got your area, the year, and the quarter. The stock code, so there's that. The level, so 0 is all occupations, 2 is occupational group, 6 is the detailed individual occupation, the title, estimated number of jobs, mean, median, hourly wages, and annual wages. So a lot of data you can get right at your fingertips. All right, so that's OEWS. That will thread through the rest of the tools that we're going to talk about. But any quick questions on OEWS before we move on? Everybody's with me. Love it. Okay. I mentioned briefly our employment projections. We call that employment outlook, and they are estimates of employment change by detailed industry and occupation, and we produce short-term, which are 2-year projections, and long-term, which are 10-year projections. The 10-year are produced every 2 years, and then 2-year projections, the short-term, we're producing every year. The long-term projections are available statewide and for those 6 planning regions, whereas the 2-year short-term projections are only available statewide. This is an example of the type of data that are available. So these are the industries that we looked at before. So we are projecting 4.6% growth over 10 years in the number of jobs overall in Minnesota. And I think that equates to like 150. Creation. Healthcare and social assistance, our largest sector, is expected to grow faster than average. That's kind of been the case historically. The pandemic was an exception to that rule. Construction's up there as well. And then there's 3 sectors that we're expecting to lose jobs over the decade. Utilities, marginally, self-employed and unpaid family workers, marginally, and then retail trade. And there's a lot of things that are kind of playing into that. One is big kind of trends and changing how we work. So retail trade, for example, we had the rise of e-commerce. You can order things online, the lessen reliance on brick and mortar stores, but then also the number of jobs at those brick and mortar stores lessen due to automation. So you've got, automatic checkout, things like that. And then utilities going through a big energy transition. A lot of that is just uncertainty as to like the number of jobs and where they're going to fall. We're losing jobs with the closure of some power plants. We expect to add some with others, but how that will balance out is unclear so far, but we're predicting a slight decline. And yeah, so you can see kind of how things are expected to change relatively. And then we have more detailed data by occupation. So here is a table of the occupations expected to grow the fastest over that 10-year period. And if you look at all of them, there's a few things that they have in common. One, almost universally, they're all requiring some sort of advanced bachelor's plus degree. And then two, they're either in what we call computer and mathematical occupations, so like data scientists, statisticians, information security analysts, or in some sort of healthcare occupation, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. Those two specifically are advanced practice providers. They're expected to boom and have been booming. So that's expected to continue. So that's what we're seeing in terms of, or expecting to grow the fastest. But beyond just like new jobs created, there's going to be a lot of churn. People leave jobs, they retire, they take new jobs in different occupations. That creates demand as well, and that creates openings. So what this is showing is the number of openings, or at least we're expecting the number of hires that are going to be needed by occupation. So when we do that, the jobs at the top are ones that have a lot of jobs and have higher than average turnover. So fast food and counter workers, cashiers, retail salespersons, et cetera, they may have a fewer overall net number of jobs available, but the turnover within is going to create high demand nonetheless. So those data are available in Employment Outlook. Any question on that? Excellent. We'll keep rolling. And job vacancy survey is another one I want to touch on. And I'm not going into Employment Outlook to show you just for time purposes, but I'm happy to demonstrate that later if people are interested. Job vacancy survey is something that is unique to Minnesota. So each year we publish estimates of the number of job vacancies by industry and detailed occupation by those 6 planning regions. Within those data, we also have characteristics. So what is the median wage offer for those job vacancies, again, by area, industry, occupation, but also what share of those vacancies are part-time versus full-time, seasonal, temp, what share require post-secondary education, what share require some level of experience, and what share require a certificate or a license. So a lot of detail that gets into the demand for positions, but then specific within industries and occupations. As an example, here are the job vacancies for 2023 broken out by industry sector. Maybe not a surprise that healthcare and social services has the biggest chunk, almost more than a quarter of job vacancies were in that sector, followed by retail, trade, and accommodation and food services, higher turnover sectors, manufacturing, educational services. So it largely tracks with the number of jobs, but there are some differences. The question here from Mary was, how is the data collection and information reflecting a shift to more stackable credentials and post-secondary certificate credentials? Yeah, so in terms of job vacancy survey, I don't know if it impacts the collection too much because it's more like, does it require a certificate? It's more of like a does it or does not. So I don't think it impacts the data collection that much, but I'll ask the JVS team to see if something has changed to reflect that, because you're right, that has been a growing trend. Thank you for the question. And then another example of data that are available at JVS. So this is broken out by the type of education required by job vacancy. You can see that the wage in the orange block goes up with the higher educational level required. And then experience, you get the same thing. But you look at the bars, that's the total number of job vacancies. Most of the job vacancies either require high school or GED equivalent or have no requirement at all. But you do have a sizable share that require bachelor's. And then most of the job vacancies require less than 1 year experience. Any other questions on JVS before we continue? Okay, excellent. All right, we'll take a brief break after this one. Occupations in demand. So this I have, and this order is intentional because we started with the most basic core of OEWS, and then we're adding on different pieces. And some you add in JVS, and you're getting. Yeah, sorry. Here, let me send you some links here while we're doing it. That's a good point from Shayla. So I'll send you the link to OID. I get ahead of myself. A lot of these because I get so excited and I forget to share links. I'm leaving you all in the dust, the data dust. Apologies. Okay, occupations in demand. We will go into data that are shared in this, but not the specific tool, and I'll explain why. So occupations in demand is our relative ranking of occupations in Minnesota and by planning region, so those 6 regions. And it's ranked by relative demand. I'd say, you've got your, top ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd say more importantly is the star system that we have. So we have a 1 through 5 star ranking system, with 5 being highest demand, 4 next highest, 3. So what we say is most important is if it's 3 or higher, it's above average demand. And that is, I think, more important to keep in mind than is it 15th highest or 20th highest. It's largely, it moves and differs by region and over time. We create these data from job vacancy survey, so number of job vacancies, unemployment insurance statistics, so the number of claims that are filed from folks leaving occupations and industries that gets incorporated, and then the total number of jobs from OEWS in it as well. So we put those together, we add in a little bit of local knowledge, and you get a ranking of demand. Along with that ranking, we include some other data that may be familiar from OEWS and from Employment Outlook. So you've got the wages, the 25th percentile and the median, and then you've got 10-year projected growth and 10-year projected openings. So that is another thing that can help with demand, but you may say, well, look at cashiers here. We've got 6.8% decline projected over the next 10 years. How can that be in demand? Well, remember I talked about those openings? So you can have a large occupation like cashiers that's going to have a lot of openings, even if that job itself is going to shrink over time, that turnover is still going to create high demand. So cashiers, we still rank here as pretty high demand in Minnesota for that reason. Not necessarily because it's expected to grow, but because the number of openings and demand created by that is going to be high. Also with it is the educational requirements typically to get into that occupation. And you'll notice that it's underlined there. That means you can click on it and get a list of programs for that occupation listed. So if you're interested in exploring that a little bit. And then typical on the job training requirements, if there are some. So it's either short-term or long-term, and that could be helpful too for folks that are exploring careers. Here's an example of, so if I clicked on registered nurses, the typical education requirement, this is what I would see. I'd get a list of different programs, the institution, the location, the title, and how long. Okay, we're gonna take, I'm gonna say 3-minute break, enough time to run to the restroom. Appreciating that you all will probably take more than 3 minutes and will actually be about 5 minutes. So come back at 10:23 and then we'll dive into putting it all together. So yeah, and if you want to stick around and ask questions in the break time, I'm happy to do that too. Oh, I also just remembered I had a poll set up that I meant to ask, so maybe I'll take this time to put the poll out there. The question is, how often do you use labor market information from Deed? Um, Feel free to answer here. This is interesting for our purposes, just to know people's familiarity and usage of the tools. Yeah, we're so immersed in these data tools, using it, every single day, every single minute of every hour for the most part, that we get detached from the usage that is more common among everyone else. So yeah, no, it's great to see uh, several people saying daily all the time or weekly, monthly. And it's okay if you haven't used it and this is your first introduction to it. Like that's totally fine. That I'd just be excited that you're here and learning about it. All right, so I'm gonna preemptively put the link in the chat this time. That's the tool we will be working on here. Feel free, if you're coming back, to respond to the poll, just getting a gauge of how often folks use the LMI tools on our site. All right, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Cameron. Maybe I'll inspire you to use it more often after this. That's the goal. All right, just another minute and a half here, and then we'll dive right back in. I'll close this poll. I think you can still answer the poll in the chat if you missed it in here. All right. Well, welcome back. Hope you got what you needed. Fresh cup of coffee, tea. We are going to pull together all the different threads of occupational data that we were just talking about into one handy to use source. So we call it the Career Pathways tool. And this is the exception to that rule that I was telling you about the landing page not being the tool. The landing page is the tool in this sense. So just remember that this is the exception. And Career Pathways brings together OEWS, so the Occupational Employment Wage Statistics, occupations in demand, projections we talked about, but it also pulls in data from the Career Force website. So more detailed, you remember that detailed OEWS page? Well, this will give you that kind of information, but also with images, pictures, and videos. So it's a lot more user-friendly and engaging than just listing text. So that's nice. And it also connects to the education available. So I'll show you how this all works because it is pretty cool. And let's go to the tool itself. I think actually, hold on. I have more to show you. Here we go. Yeah, this is what it looks like. And another thing that it's the MDE piece is it is organized by career cluster. So if you're familiar with the career wheel, pathways and fields, it's based off of that, and you can sort and filter on that career wheel as well, which is handy for folks who speak that MDE language. You know, if you're in a school, you're more likely to talk about the pathways and clusters than you are occupational groups that we do from the LMI side. So we got those two to talk together, and this is one of the results. It's updated monthly, and the data are available by state and for the statewide as well as planning region. So let's look at career pathways. The link is in the chat if you want to follow along. Landing page and tool itself. So a little description on what it does. It really is super handy. I got to give a shout out to my colleague, Luke Reiner, who is the regional analyst for Central Minnesota. He created this tool. And I really think it fills a great need, bringing all these things into one place. I'll say here, if you want more detailed training on career pathways specifically, there's a recording of a training session here. Students and job seekers, and we'll talk about this path to career success in a second, but you can link to that here. That's a suite of resources for mostly high school students, but anybody that's really looking for work or considering entering the workforce versus education or training. Indeed Career Pathways worksheet. So if you are working with students and want to work through this, but kind of want to have them figure it out on their own, this Pathways worksheet is meant to do that. So it steps you through it, and it's engaging. It's just like a Google Forms basically. So it's really straightforward, but it walks through the tool. Some helpful hints, video tutorials, a tutorial that's a little bit quicker than this training session. But here is the tool itself, and a few things to point out. So you can choose your region or state-wide. You can search for an occupation just like you could in OEWS. So let's use registered nurse again as an example. There it is. Select it, and it filters to that individual occupation. Okay, so if you want to reset, there's a little handy reset button right here. And that takes you back to Minnesota. So you'll notice the demand ranking here, 5, again, being the highest. That's the OID pulled in, your occupational title from OEWS, the typical educational requirements. So the different options there, no typical education, high school or less, associate, bachelor's, graduate, or vocational training. So you can filter by that. So let's say I'm most interested in vocational training. What are the highest demand occupations for vocational training? There they are. And the color of the bars over here, so there, I'll explain what's going on here. So the color of the bar matches with these career clusters that are listed across the top here, which if you hover over, you can get. So nursing assistants, LPNs, they're in the health science career cluster. The length of the bar represents the number of filled jobs, and then the dot represents the median wage in that area. If you hover over it, you can get a little more data. So you get all those things that were listed, the career cluster, the demand category, the 25th to 75th percentile wages. So 50% of jobs pay between that range, and then the projections. So how many openings are we projecting in the next 10 years for this occupation? And then what's that percentage? So you can see how it compares against others. And then, which is super, well, here, I'll show this first. You can filter. So health science, let's say we just want to look at the health science occupations. We click that career cluster button, and then we get them, just those. But let's say I want to dive into a little more detail for an occupation that's listed here. I'm interested in automotive service technicians and mechanics. I want to learn more about that. So I'm hovering over the occupational title, click on it, and this is where it pulls in that career force MN page. So different titles, you get a video of the day in the life, which that I think is also very handy to show folks, kind of like demonstrate what you would be doing in this occupation. Daily work activities listed. Pulls in our LMI here by region, so a lot of the same data, but adds in cost of living, so you can compare what you'd be making to a cost of living. Typical certifications are listed, as well as a typical education and any licenses that are required usually. But let's say you are interested in learning about some of these certifications. You can click on them. Takes you to that certification organization, which is handy. And then most handy is finding current job openings in this occupation. So it preloads it and it searches, and then you've got a listing of currently open jobs in the area you're looking for. So it has basically everything you're looking for: the job, all the details, what it pays, what it typically requires in terms of training and education, and then openings themselves. So I like Career Pathways because it really can be a one-stop shop for folks that are in career exploration. Any questions on Career Pathways here? Also say it's nice because it's got good colors and it's designed well. It's kind of more pleasing to the eye than some of the other tools. So a very handy tool, especially when you're trying to grab onto that limited attention that is available sometimes. Right, yeah, Career Pathways pulls it all together. Very handy. Okay. I want to mention Career and Education Explorer. So for those of you that are more familiar with our LMI tools, you've seen this tool before. This is kind of the same idea as Career Pathways, just executed a little bit differently. And the big thing that Career and Education Explorer really has that's very beneficial is what we call the eligible training provider list. So some of you may be familiar with this, but this is the list of trainings and programs in the state that meet WIOA requirements. So if you're a job counselor and you want to know, is there a training or a program that can help this person get the skills to fill this occupation in demand, you got to check that ETPL to see if it's there, and that is part of the Career and Education Explorer. I will say they have revamped it. It's not like 100% finished, but it is a little bit nicer to use than the previous version if you've used it like maybe a couple years ago. I don't have a ton of time to dive into it other than just to kind of show you like what it looks like, but it's got a lot of the same data that you'll see in Career Pathways. Pulls in that OEWS data. It has the different job openings, so you can connect to that, the different titles. It's just a super handy thing as well. So if you prefer to use Career and Education Explorer to Career Pathways, that's totally cool. A lot of the same data are available in there. But it has the best connection to looking at the different educational and training options available by occupation. So you can search either by occupation and find the education to meet that occupation, or you can come from the education side and see which occupations it matches to. Compare skills is another one that I think is super handy. This is on the Career Force website. I'll click on this real quick. So this dives into underneath the credentials piece. So if you just want to see how your skills currently match up with another occupation, or which occupations you could maybe translate those skills into, this is a good tool. So you've got how to compare to in-demand careers. So you put your occupation in and it kind of lists the different skills you have, and then it matches up with the currently in-demand careers. Or you can match it based off the best skills match, because maybe you don't have the best match to the occupations currently in demand, but if you just want to do a pure skills match, you can do that. And then you can compare it to a career of interest. So let's say you have one in mind already and you want to know like where your deficits or your strengths are in terms of skills, you can do that too. So it'll give you your skill and like a target kind of skill for the occupation you're interested in and match them up. So that is fun and handy when you're having conversations with job seekers and career explorers. Okay, let's get into some of the education side. That was the demand kind of side. And now we're going to transition into the supply side, and starting with SLEDs. Again, that's the statewide longitudinal education data system, or SLEDs. And I'm going to put the link into the chat. And it really is a super handy source of information. It matches up student data. Again, I think I said this earlier, pre-K all the way through post-secondary and entering the workforce. So we can track folks and see outcomes. What I use it most for is not necessarily how students fare in school, which is part of it, like you can track that as well, but where students are going after. Are they entering the workforce, or are they going and enrolling in post-secondary education? If so, what kind? That is more what I use it for. So I'm going to show that. Here are just some screenshots of some examples, but I am going to demonstrate it because I think it's really cool. All right, so this is the SLED landing page. You can see the context. It explains what it is here. On the left, it organizes it by high school grads and college students. I often will use it here looking at high school graduates, and I'll either look at enrollment, so enrolling in college after graduating high school, or entering the workforce, those two. So enrollment, you pull that up, this is what it looks like. This is statewide, and you've got where are they enrolling. So 40% of graduates are enrolling in college or post-secondary education or training the following fall in Minnesota, and 18% of those graduates are enrolling outside of Minnesota. So that is often of interest to workforce development. Like a lot of folks will say, like, all our young people are leaving the state, and you say, oh, well, 18% by our measure here, so that you can have some information to back it up. So if your school district, for example, is saying like you're worried that everyone's leaving your school district, you could pull up SLEDs and confirm that. Where are they going in the fall? So more specifically, the type of institution. So is it a public 4-year in Minnesota, public 2-year, private 2-year, private 4-year? You can see the breakdown there. Number of credits taken in the first first term. And then I think this is fascinating, the top institutions that high school students are enrolling in. So U of M, Twin Cities, #1, Mankato, Duluth, NDSU. This is super interesting when you look at the region. So you can also, this is all statewide data. You can search for your own school district or region. So let's see, someone shout out a school district, and let's see what theirs is in the chat. ISD 271. I wonder, I don't do 271. Can you tell me what the name of that one is? I might Brainerd. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't have that one. We'll do Brainerd Public School. Oh, sorry, 271. Reese, you got jumped. What is 271? Okay, we'll look that one up next, I promise. Okay, so we pulled up Brainerd, so you can see how Brainerd compares to statewide, which is interesting. So both of these are lower, but what that means most likely is that there's a higher share of Brainerd graduates that are entering the workforce more directly. And we can confirm that by going to this piece here, entering the workforce. All right, so we talked about that 58%, they're enrolled in college, 30% are employed of Minnesota high school graduates, and then 12% we don't know, we don't have any. They either are employed outside of Minnesota, or they're just not working or enrolled in school. which can happen. So I still don't know what 271 is, so we're going with Brainerd again. So you can see how that, so yep, I was right. So a higher share of folks graduating from Brainerd in 2022 are in the workforce. And then you can also look to see how often they're employed. So are they working really part-time or are they more full-time? And you can see, yeah, it says part-time is more common, and like 82 are working 20 hours or less with an average hours worked of 10. And you can see their average hourly wage. And then which also is of interest is the industry. So you get the breakdown here. Some of these you don't have enough data, but it looks like leisure and hospitality and trade, transportation, and utilities are the two top sectors for recent grads being employed for Brainerd. So pretty interesting. Any questions on sleds? Those are the two things I use it most for, but you can go into more detail here, like course taking, high school academics. But mostly what I'm looking at is high school enrollment and entering the workforce, because we're talking about that transition period. And I'm talking to high school classes. Mostly we're talking about what are you going to do after graduation. So a lot of times I'll pull up their school district, and show them like, here's what your peers have done. So a lot of times, at least when I was going through high school, there's a lot of pressure just go like to a 4-year college after high school. But you can pull this up and be like, hey, in reality, like not everybody's doing that, and that might not be the best option for everybody. So here is just the data that actually represent your peers that graduated in the last couple of years and what they've chosen to do. And a lot of times that kind of opens some eyes and be like, oh, okay, there are other options out there, and I can explore them. So it is a super handy tool, and really rich in data. Right. Let's go back to the presentation. Sleds is awesome, right? And it tells you here like what kind of questions you can add. I want to know what ISD 27 is there. Find out. Bloomington. Okay. I promise you, Reese, we'll see what's up in Bloomington here. Okay, there you go. More students from Bloomington are enrolling in college relative to the state, about 2/3. There you go. And about 23% are entering the workforce, at least the 2022 class. And you can see how that changes over time too. Like you don't have to just do, so 10 years ago, even higher share. Matches experience. All right, back to the presentation. So that was sleds. You're familiar with this view now. I want to move up into post-secondary. So now we're going to graduate employment outcomes, which in a lot of ways kind of mirrors sleds, and it actually does use sleds data to produce. And what it does is it takes sleds data and it connects it with wage records. So folks that graduate from Minnesota post-secondary institutions and become employed in Minnesota, we can say where they ended up 2 years later by institution, by award type, so which degree they got, but also instructional program. So let's say you got an associate in registered nursing from Minnesota State Mankato or something like that. We can see the outcomes for that specific cohort of folks. And this is super handy, not only for people that are considering these programs, but also for education institutions and administrators to just see kind of like what the outcomes are actually for folks that end up employed in Minnesota. So you can answer those type of questions. Here's an example of a table in Geo, and we'll dive into this. So I'll just show this pretty quickly. So this is Hibbing Community College, now Minnesota North, Hibbing campus. And graduates from 2021 by award type, so certificate, associate, those are the two types that are offered here, and then the instructional program. So electrical and power transmission installers. There were 21 graduates in 2021 from HCC, and they were making a median hourly wage 2 years later of $22.73. Most of them were working in construction, and most of them were employed in Northeast Minnesota. We don't have 5th or 8th year yet because we are not 5 or 8 years past 2021 yet. But when they get to that point, those data get filled in, and you can see how the trend of outcome continues. Similarly, you could see what share have reported wages 2 years later in Minnesota. There are some programs that have higher shares of folks that either continue education, right here, that's what the second column is, or have a higher share that go out of state for employment, which is mostly what this employment outcome unknown is. They're either not employed in Minnesota or just not employed at all. And then this is a little more detail on full-time or part-time. So second year after graduation by program, you can see how many graduates, what the annual median wage was 2 years later, what percent were employed full-time, because a lot of times you could be employed, let's say you're getting your philosophy degree, and 95% of those graduates may be employed, but they may be employed in an industry that's not related to what they studied, and they may not be employed full-time. And those are both important things to know too for the quality of outcome. So that is available. And then we also derive some other tools, but first I want to go into Geo itself. I'll throw this into the chat. All right, so here's the landing page. We've got a tool here, and again, a shout out to the researcher that did and compiled all of these data to create Geo, Alessia Lieber in our office. Just does some amazing research both on graduate employment outcomes, but CTE work too. So she has a bunch of great research that she's published that I recommend you check out if you're interested in these topics. She is the guru. There's some links here to those articles. So this shows the trend of wages by year post-graduation and program. So down here, carpenters, they start out making like 1939, 1946, and then you can see how it grows, but it doesn't grow as fast as, say, biochemistry grads. And so that's often useful too. Like you may start out 2 years post-graduation making a wage, but what is your kind of ceiling? What's your floor in terms of wage growth relative to all these other graduates? Does it grow swiftly, or is it kind of start high and stay high, start low, stay low, that kind of thing? All right, we're gonna click Data Tool. This is the landing page. So you got your buttons to go back, you're in how to interpret and methodology if you want to dive into that, glossary for the terms. You got your graduation year. So 2021 is the most recent we have because we have to wait a couple of years to get those outcomes. It's more meaningful the longer you wait, right? Because the folks are more likely to land in whatever career they're going to stay in or occupation they're going to stay in for a longer term. So at least 2 years. Whether you want to look at Minnesota area, Minnesota statewide, Twin Cities, or Greater Minnesota, and that just filters out which schools you can look at. Award type, so certificates, associate, bachelor's, and graduate, those are the 4 types that we have available. You can also look at them all combined. Institutional types, so 4-year public, private, etc. And then every institution in Minnesota is listed here. So you can look at individual institutions and then instructional program. So that's where you can get some real good detail. So does anybody want to put a school into the chat that we can look at and kind of dig into their outcomes? Otherwise, I'll Century, perfect. From my my hood growing up, from Matamidi, so Century is a great choice. So click Century. I did all awards here. I'm going to view all program subtotals and view results. So the first tab is hourly wage trend. So you've got your SIP, so that's classification of instructional programs. So that's just how the structure for different programs. You could think of them as like majors or that sort of thing. So instructional program, 2 years post-graduation. So you have the number of graduates from 2021, what their median hourly wage is 2 years later, and then if there are data available 3, 5, and 8. So let's actually go back a couple of years so we can get that 3rd year, 5th year data. Perfect. Okay. And we've got business programs. I click this to expand the view, and you can see the different programs that are offered at Century. They may be called something a little bit different by the school itself. So this is the STIP title. So if you're like, I don't think we have that specific program, it's just listed differently. The title's a little bit different. That's just so they have, so you can compare across institutions. So the number of graduates, you can see how the wages compared, median hourly wage the 3rd year. So hopefully it goes up here, and you can see most cases it does. But this is where it gets cool, if it isn't cool already. The top industry of employment. So finance and insurance for the overall business, management, marketing, and related support services. So if I click on this little image here, I get a pop-up of the share of those graduates for the last 4 years, so 2018 through 2021, by industry that they're working in, but then also the median wage that they make. So if I'm somebody that's looking at a program at a school, or even just in general, I would be interested in this. Like if I finish with this degree in this instructional program, most likely I'm going to be in finance and insurance, or at least a largest share ends up in finance and insurance, and your median wage 2 years after is 24. Does that match with my expectations with what I'm looking at? You know, like it's going to be different for everybody, of course, but it really helps to give you an idea of the real world outcomes. Same way, you can see the top region of employment. Century, no surprise that most of those graduates are employed in the Twin Cities, 94%. If you're looking at a program, say in Hibbing Community College, that share changes quite a bit. But it also depends on the program. Like if you're studying computer science at UMD, you're still most likely to go be employed in the Twin Cities, because most of those computer science or computer related jobs are located in the Twin Cities. So you can do that for each program, down to detailed healthcare, education. But you can also look to see time. Looks like engineering folks from Century are most likely to be employed full-time, but there's also not a ton of graduates there. And that should also hopefully go up the further you get from graduation. So it goes from 64 to 70 from 2nd to 3rd year in terms of working full-time. And then back down to 58% for 4th year. So that just could be, because we don't have a ton of graduates there. And then employment status, this is the share. So if you're, wondering what share we're really referring to, and you look at engineering here, 77% have reported wages, 3.7% we know are studying further, 18.5% unknown. So maybe engineering is one of those that has a higher share that are employed out of the state. And that's why that full-time on the previous tab went down, because they're employed, but employed full-time in Wisconsin or something like that. So that's one of the drawbacks of GEO, is that we can't track folks across state borders, but I think that is an effort that is being pursued. But if you're looking for folks that are employed in Minnesota, studying in Minnesota, there's no better data source than GEO. Yeah, what questions do folks have on GEO? We're bumping up against the end of the hour, so I want to leave a little bit of space here for people to ask some questions. I got through the main tools and sources I wanted to. Yeah, I love this tool. I feel like it's really underutilized. but it's just fantastic. It gives you so much granular detail by area. And a lot of those narratives about like our graduates are leaving, you can look at that here. Like you can really dive in to see by program, by school, like, is that actually the case? And one thing that jumps out just from my experience in using these data is that, folks that are going to these 2-year schools and programs, much less likely to leave their region. They're going there because they have a job that they know is tied to those skills that they're going to be getting or that credential they're going to be getting. So they'll go to the school intending to stick around or with the intention to stick around and find a job in the area, or maybe they already have one lined up and they just need to get that credential. So 2 years tied to 2-year schools and programs are tied much more closely to folks staying in the region. You get those 4-year schools, then it really depends. It goes by program to program, award to award type. All right, I'm gonna go back to the presentation and we'll try and wrap some things up. We have some other tools that we built off of Geo. So looking long-term, like 7, 8 years post-graduation, what are the wages by award type, by instructional program? So we made this cool dashboard, which the link will be in the materials I send out. So we built that, but we also added in cost of living and an estimate of loans. So if you know how much you're going to be paying, you can put that in and see how that compares, add it in with typical cost of living to see how your income compares to that, or your typical income for that award and or program. So that's a pretty cool thing I recommend checking out. We didn't really have time to get into NCES and IPEDS, but these data are really, really great as well. And they're available for all institutions throughout the US. So this isn't just, this is a national data source. I could do a whole another 1.5-hour presentation on these data as well, but they're super handy. A lot of detailed data by institution that is above and beyond what is available in Geo. So not the like employment and wage outcomes, but if you want to look at the number of completions by very detailed program, that's in here, graduation rates, institutional characteristics, etc. You can also look at it, field of study and award level, race and ethnicity completions by race and ethnicity, which is super, and gender, which is super interesting as well. Just an example of how I've used that. So I took completions for institutions in Northeast Minnesota, matched them up via a crosswalk with our SOC occupational data. So you can get how many completions in a program that is directly linked to an occupation in demand are there. So are we providing enough graduates with the skills and experience and credentials required that this occupation requires? And are we meeting the projected needs for the occupation? So connecting supply and demand, tying it all together. This is an example of how you can use those data. We have other tools, QCW I mentioned, cost of living. So comparing your income versus how much you can be expected to spend is kind of like a bare minimum. Unemployment insurance statistics, our regional and county profiles I really encourage you to check out. It's kind of like a menu of all these data and more that I've been talking about for your county or region. Again, we have those publications. And then, yeah, I'm gonna open it up now for some questions, but if you need to take off, great. Thank you again for joining. I'll be sending out all the materials and links to all these tools we addressed, and I hope that you found this useful and that you can use this in your work. But thank you so much for joining today. And if you ever need to reach out, here's the contact information for me and my colleagues. And we look forward to hearing from you. We'd be happy to help you out. And I know that we went through all this real quick, so if you have any questions as you're starting to dig into it yourself, please reach out. We, again, are more than happy to help you. So thank you. Have a great day. I'll stick around a little bit, turn off the recording, and answer any questions.